Welcome to another episode of the No Ego podcast. As promised, I am bringing Alex Dorr back, and everybody knows Alex. He is the Vice President of People Evolution at Reality Based Leadership, and we thought we'd do some riffing today. Alex has been coming to me, asking me some questions about feedback, and I have to tell you, it's not always my favorite topic because, well, you'll find out about all of that. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you for having me again. And thanks for letting me dive into just one of the things I'm hearing out there, and I'm interested in just picking your brain on for another.
No problem. I'm glad you're back. Like our last episode, people were like, that was fire. They were loving it. So we got to make this a regular.
Yeah. If you hadn't seen that last episode, it was about organizational alignment and this whole does my opinion count? And Sai, I just bursted in and I told Sai, I've had so many people ask about this. Let's get together. Sit your butt down.
He makes me do this stuff, you guys. I love it, but anyway, love it. Alex always comes with some great questions that he's recently experienced from the audience that, you're in front of so many audiences lately.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And the big one we're going at here is feedback, just because so many people have been asking about it. What's our take on it? Sai doesn't usually like talking about it too much. So I wanted to just have a download from her brain for you guys. And that was our plan today. So
awesome. So the topic is feedback. And it's not that I am not willing to talk about it. It's just that there is so much ado about nothing when it comes to feedback. Like people spend hours and hours and hours teaching people to give feedback. And if someone's toggled down all these traditional leadership philosophies that we tell people to use, it's just going to punch the ego in the face. It's like, unless you're doing like a intervention, which is where we get 20 people together to give, an addict feedback to get them into treatment, it's kind of a violent, harsh way to go through the world. But yeah, it came up a long time ago. We were at a conference someplace and you were laughing at me.
Well, to tee this up, so we're at this, it was a huge conference, a world-renowned researcher on feedback. And, I had been taught kind of our philosophies on it and had some idea, but I was learning in this session. And as it went on, I took a glance over at Sai. We didn't get to sit by each other. I see her taking a bunch of notes. I'm like, oh man, this must be really spot on. And after the session, we get together and it looked like she was really just interested. But I said, what'd you think of that? And she goes, you guys, we have known a lot of this information since, did you say 1979?
Yeah, like 1979.
It was like Marshall Goldsmith. It's like amazing. It
was probably in the 80s if it was Marshall. He's been writing such good stuff.
And it's like, we have this amazing body of work. It's such good information. And they just did like a $5 million study to discover that you're not supposed to give people feedback. You're supposed to have others ask for it. Yeah. And you're like, oh my gosh, we've known this, information forever.
Long. And the whole gist of the conversation is that this particular person, and I'm not dishing anybody's research. Get out there and research. But it was like a big buildup. It was like, oh my gosh. So just hang on. We have this big breakthrough about feedback. And the bottom line was that the best feedback is feedback somebody asks you for rather than feedback that you give. And we've known that high accountables or self-reflective, they're asking for some data. They're asking for your perspective. But the average person who needs the feedback probably in the moment of their need is not going to come asking because the ego's playing them. There's no ego ever that asks for feedback. What they're asking for is agreement. Or disagreement. They're either asking for confirmation or picking a fight. But I get the gist of the survey that the feedback I will receive and take in is best if I'm the one who came asking you for it, because in that way I'm coming hopefully open-minded, open-hearted, and asking you for feedback. But there's been a lot of writing, there's a lot of teaching, a lot of old school people still ask me all the time, like, do you teach people basic leadership stuff on how to give feedback? And yes, we do. But feedback's not the holy grail. People think it is, right?
Yeah.
And then if I can just get snarky for a minute, my other lead into that is when people are saying that they already have leaders in place, who aren't able to have just conversations that are honest. That's really what feedback is, right? And people are like, well, I just hate the confrontation. And I'm like, well, you never have to be confrontational if you're conversational. If you're keeping up with having good dialogue with your folks, it never has to get into this big dreaded feedback place. That's usually when we go from like silence to violence. We haven't said anything for a year, and then we give them feedback, and people are ticked because we've been out of integrity for a year. We've been wanting to have a conversation that we, instead of treated them as if nothing's wrong, and probably talked behind their backs, right? But leadership is the only job you can keep even when you refuse to do it. Like, it's the only job you can, leadership is the only job you can have and, not do it. So let's say you're a welder, right? You're on the shop floor. And I go, hey, I really need you to do some welding. And you're like, yeah, I'm not that comfortable with it. Then I'm like, no, seriously, I need you to do some welding. Well, maybe I need a little bit more training on how to weld. I'm like, but I hired you for the job of welding. Please weld. Well, I don't know. No. They would be fired.
Like immediately.
Yeah. So you go to a leader, like, I need you to have conversations with your people and really manage their energy and
coach in the moment.
And they're like, yeah, I'm not that comfortable. Can I have a training? And 3 years later, we're like, you're still not giving accurate information.
Feedback.
Well, and not even feedback, but accurate information so your people to adjust their efforts, right? And they're like, yeah, I'm still not that comfortable. Do you have a training? And it often blows my mind but people can keep that job.
Yeah.
It's the only job you can keep, even when you aren't doing it.
And maybe still get promoted again.
And still get promoted to a higher level of leadership.
Oh, I love that. Something I wrote down here is, I heard you say this, and I think it'd be awesome for you to dive deeper into it, so you talked about leaders having the conversation and giving better information, but you often say that the best feedback actually doesn't even come from your leaders. It's from a bunch of other sources. So what do you mean by that when you're saying?
So, and let me back up. So the best source of feedback is reality. Okay. So the best motivator is reality. So if you want your people to have a clear picture of what works and what doesn't work, what they're doing that helps or hinders, what they're doing that is successful or not successful, or leads to their happiness or not their happiness, they have to have a direct relationship with reality. Reality is the best source of feedback. And this whole leader give feedback is a big workaround for reality. I think that leaders need to work to make sure that people have a direct relationship with reality. And there's two ways that your relationship with reality gets distorted. Okay. One is your own ego. So your ego, when you're looking through the lens of ego, it's like looking through a pair of glasses with the wrong prescription. So the ego will distort your view of reality because it paints you as the victim and somebody else as the villain. And it always has this justification even for your bad behavior. So it distorts reality because it doesn't want you to see your part in the outcome, right? And so ego, how do you move beyond ego? Self-reflection. Yep. So what's the leader's role in getting you to have a direct feedback or direct relationship with reality? Is not giving you feedback on behalf of reality. It's like helping you self-reflect
on that reality.
On that reality. And so a lot of people are like, reality called and, gave me some information to present to you, and in the form of feedback. And that's probably my main problem with feedback is like, why do we go through the middleman called leaders who corrupt it again with their own bias and with their own, because most leaders give feedback on my view of your approach or my view of your attitude or my view of, and that's all completely, now it's like triple bias, right? The second way you get your data corrupted from reality is that leaders interfere with that relationship by enabling you. Mm-hmm. And so they bend reality. It's like, well, I don't like this change. And instead of letting you have pain of what being unready feels like, they're like, well, let me slow it down for you. Let you skip this upgrade. So when I look, it's counterintuitive, I know, but when I look at the role of a leader is to help facilitate good mental processes. One is reflect beyond your ego so that you can become active and get into accountability, which is the main driver of happiness. And the other is to not interfere with your relationship with reality. And so for me, when it comes to feedback, the best sources of feedback are agreed upon metrics, like what numbers,
sales goals.
What numbers did you promise, or what did you promise to deliver under what circumstances? And then the feedback needs to be self-reflection. So when I work with people and I'm like, you committed to this project to this level of quality by this date, and you're not on track for that, help me understand what's going on. People will go, well, you don't understand, priorities changed. Now, a leader's role is not to give you feedback about that. It's to facilitate good thinking. Given that priorities are changing, how can you be on track? Mm-hmm. The problem is that leaders tend to go in to give you feedback about how you need to get better at changing priorities, instead of
with their strategies and their solve it for you.
And they get all in your business. And then once you're toggled down, any strategy a leader gives you is called not going to work, right? Do not understand.
Tried that before.
And people get really miserable about it. So that's what I say about the best motivator. The best motivator is reality. The best feedback is just a reflection of reality, something that I'm not trying to convince you of, but you and I are working and looking at together. Yeah. Let's look at your numbers. And that's why in feedback, I say a lot, don't take my word for this.
Check it out.
I try and let the ego off. Don't take my word for this. Check it out for yourself, right? And that's what happens sometimes when people get really zealous about reality-based leadership is they start using that for feedback. You're not reality-based, or you're drama-filled, or I'm like, whoa. Back in your lane. Right?
Yeah.
Now, do I have to rate your performance? Yeah. Do I have to evaluate when it comes to compensation? Yes. But my evaluation should come off us reading the tea leaves that reality gave back.
Yeah. Love that.
So does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Because one of my favorite stories of yours about this, Sai, is that situation. You had a doctor that was struggling with a compliance initiative a while back, and just what you had tried everything. And then eventually you found a strategy where it was like, I'm just going to stop interfering with this, all these asterisks about, his performance, and just really stop interfering with reality.
His view of reality.
Yeah.
A lot of leaders don't understand the many ways they enable. And they often come, they're like, how can I give this person feedback so they'll change? And my whole approach is a lot of times giving them feedback, you're not even their boss, but quit interfering with their relationship with reality by enabling them. So Alex, that is such a great story because it illustrates how most of us enable and then try and fix it through feedback, but feedback can't overcome enabling because it's such double messaging. So the story I think that you're talking about involved a doctor, I'll just call Dr. Smith. And we had a new initiative in our organization on diabetic care. Through our data, we had found out that the care we provided our diabetic patients was below national standard. Now, if I had just given anecdotal feedback, those docs would never have been convinced. But I came in with the data, and so did the chief medical officer, and said, folks, we need to make some improvements. We have to do best practice. We're not there.
Yeah.
So that was motivating to most of the physicians, just seeing where we were with our patients versus national standards. That's a great
clear
technique.
View of reality. Yeah.
Clear view of reality. Now, I had one physician whose view of reality wasn't so clear. And part of the initiative, we asked people to do outbound calling to patients to make sure they were getting in for the care they needed, that there wasn't some reason they weren't caring for themselves, like maybe they needed connection with community resources, whatever. Best practice was you call these patients. Dr. Smith absolutely refused. He's like, I'm not a telemarketer. I'm not going to spend my time calling patients. And I am not the boss of him, but I just continue to set expectations, say this is best practice. And I collected data on who was compliant with best practices and what the impact was.
Yeah.
Chief medical officer of the hospital called. He said, I would love to see your data. So great. I don't show anything to others before I show it to my physicians. So I met with the physicians, showed them the data. A lot of the physicians were really encouraged by their trends.
Yeah.
They were compliant with best practices. Lo and behold, their outcomes were increasing, going up, except for Dr. Smith. And he sat pretty smugly. He's like, yeah, I'm not going to do outbound calling. My compliance level is 0. And so I tried to stay pretty neutral, and he tried to seemingly pick a few fights, but I just said, this isn't my relationship with reality. This is
yours,
and the measurement of how good you're doing. This, I don't even know why I'm involved in this. He wanted to like argue with me like about my feedback. I'm like, this isn't even my deal. I'm the person who collects the numbers. So I did let him know I'm taking this to the chief medical officer, and he's like, well, tell him I'm never going to do an outbound call, and I don't want you back in my office. I'm like, I'll share that with them. So the next day I'm heading in to see the chief medical officer as promised, and my phone rings and it's Smith. And I'm like, that's progress. He said he's never doing an outbound call. He's calling me.
Took a day.
Yeah, it took a day. And he's like, never going to talk to Cy Wakeman. He's calling me. Well, what happened is I let him in some self-reflection. He couldn't bully me into changing the numbers. So now overnight, he's dying to talk to me. So I go into the meeting with Steve. I didn't have time to call Smith back. I go in the meeting with Steve, and I am presenting the numbers and get through the meeting. And we talked about a few strategies, and I call Smith back. I'm like, hey, what's up? He's like, did you have that meeting with Steve? I go, exactly as I said. He goes, did you show the numbers you showed me? I go, exactly as I showed you. He goes, well, but did you also tell him that I see the most patients in the clinic?
Oh.
And I said, well, no, we weren't talking about throughput. He goes, well, did you tell him I have the highest acuity level of people in the clinic? I'm like, we weren't talking about acuity levels. And then it dawned on me, the smoke screen people had put up.
Oh my gosh.
How they had bent reality. If ever Smith wasn't doing something, they just diverted attention to what he was doing.
Yeah.
And he grew really nervous. I said, no, I didn't add any of those things in. That wasn't the topic. And he got really quiet. And he goes, oh my gosh, I bet Steve was mad. I go, he looked furious. He goes, well, I got to get off the phone and give him a call. I go, he said he'd be calling you. And I realized that for years, this doctor's behavior had gone unchecked. Everybody was talking about what to do about his behavior while they put asterisks by his name. Anything that they looked at he wasn't good in, they put an asterisk by his name and go, yeah, but remember he does this well.
Yeah,
they fogged his view of reality by letting him focus on things that were no longer important. Seeing the most patients in the clinic is a horrible metric. We don't want to see patients in the clinic. We are paid not to see patients in the clinic. In the 60s, we were paid to see patients in the clinic.
Yeah.
In the 2015 era, we're paid not to see patients in the clinic.
True.
And so I think that's the ways that we collude with and enable people to have a skewed view of their reality. Once I put up that level of transparency with no judgment, with no bias, and no feedback. I never gave the guy feedback, ever.
Just use the numbers.
And his
as
behavior
the bypass.
changed. Yeah, because his relationship with reality got more clear, and it changed. And so that's what I mean. I mean, we're talking about feedback, and I want to give people some techniques for feedback because there's a place for feedback. But most of the time, the feedback you're giving people is a mixed message, because when you juxtapose it against all the enabling you do of them, right, it doesn't fit. The ego will find the hypocrisy in that every time.
I think that's so powerful. As you tell a lot of those stories, it's like if you could just sit down and self-reflect and see, you can find a lot of these ways. You won't even realize it in the moment that you are just enabling in that way. So
always
powerful.
Yeah. You're saying feedback, I want you to be more accountable, but your behavior is, let me get that for you.
Yeah, so true. And so building on that, we were at another conference, and this organization had taken feedback kind of to the extreme, as I would call it.
I love it. You're talking about Ray Dalio's group.
Where listeners, we were at this conference, and this Ray Dalio, his organization, basically records everything. Conversation.
Everything's transparent.
There's meetings where on this app, there's like a heat map. So you can rate people's input. And so at the end of the meeting, it's like green if it was like 10 out of 10. And it's like red if basically someone was disruptive in the meeting or if you didn't like what they said. And that...
It wasn't even that you didn't like. It wasn't helpful. Like it wasn't based on expertise.
Yeah, if it was like opinion instead of expertise. But then that could show you some things, like if someone was saying stuff and you were saying, you know, it's red, I don't think that was very valuable, but then everyone else thought it was valuable. Then you have some new data from reality that you might be seeing something wrong, or you might be adding in some judgment or have a conflict with that person you need to check or edit your story. And so anyway, all of these things they're doing make it like look like a privacy issue for some, but they really wanted full transparency. So you're constantly getting data from your world, your reality, your conversations to see how you're doing.
Yeah.
So
and it wasn't a privacy issue. It's like you agreed to it by working there.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I thought that was so interesting. What were some of your thoughts on that approach and just going
Extreme love of this approach. So Ray Dalio wrote the book, Principles.
Yeah.
And if you haven't read that book, that's like reality-based leadership on steroids, right? But that will only work with evolved, mature folks that are involved in their own self-reflection. So when you get beyond ego and you make that no ego workplace work, it can take it to the level that Dalio does. And Dalio, every meeting, even between him and another person, everything is taped. Not that people sit around and watch all the tapes, but because you behave better when you can't be anonymous or when you can't be private. I think anonymity brings out the worst in people. If you tell me that there's an issue that you can only tell me on a survey without signing your name, I'm pretty suspect unless it's something that we actually need a hotline, not a survey for, like harassment or, racism or, so I actually love it because everybody walks away with what I would call kind of their baseball card of their stats.
Yeah,
right?
I remember that part too.
Yeah, it's like a baseball card. I mean, there's so many times where if you asked me how I think I'm doing and you ask someone keeping my statistics, like I'm a softball player from way back. I'm like, God, I'm hitting good tonight. And my statistician would be like, yeah, that one time up to bat.
Yeah.
The other ones you got, walked. It's like, you're not hitting it all. Wait,
well, it reminds me of, I was an ex-athlete, played basketball. And whenever we watched film, you got all your teammates there and you're like, man, I was sprinting back hard on defense there. And you think you're working so hard. And then they put the film up and you see kind of your stats, your reality there. And you're just like, dogging it back and people are flying by you.
That's why I just love it.
You're just always distorted. So yeah.
The ego does horrible math. And your narration to me about your thoughts isn't going to get through my ego. My hard, cold reality of watching that tape is. Like if you ask me, so I'm preparing for a hike up Kilimanjaro, just a little hike. And if you ask me how many steps I got in today, I'd be like, 10, 20,000. And then you look at my Apple Watch and it's like 2,000. Like we think we're so good at knowing how we actually show up in reality. And I mean, I just don't think everybody has to be stressed all the time, but I think transparency would really help the human race, right? Right now in our nation, it's not the on-stage behavior that people, are as concerned about. It's all the offstage behavior that we have to commission huge groups of people to investigate to figure out what's going on. I think a little more transparency would make everybody up their game. And
that's something I'm fascinated by is people are worried at how much it seems as if like these apps are in our privacy, like Google Home and or Alexa and all that, like it's listening. But it's interesting how that, if you look at Dalio's example where, every, conversation you're having, it's recorded. You would notice that you probably won't talk as poorly behind people's back. You probably won't. It's interesting as the world's getting more. It heightens your integrity. You kind of are behavior. Like, man, maybe we shouldn't be as negative about that. And it just, I don't know. I'm interested to see how that'll play out. I'm often worried why people, and that's a whole nother podcast we got to do. I'm often worried by why people need anonymity or private spaces. Like when you move into an open space, people are like, well, I need an office with a door on it. I'm like, why? To
you gossip about others? Like, well, I need a place to have confidential conversations. Well, HR tells me you don't have those, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's just so funny that about privacy and anonymity, but that's probably a whole nother podcast. But I love his stuff. And I don't think we have to go to the extreme to videotape everybody and make them watch videotapes of themselves. But I do want the message to come through loud and clear. If your feedback is the prime source of how people get information about their performance in your organization, you're on shaky grounds. And that's why the feedback feels so big and so important. And
people don't want to do it.
Yeah. And people don't want to do it. And people crave it is because if your people are that out of touch with reality, if you provide them no other way except your approval or disapproval for knowing how they're doing their work, one, you're micromanaging. Two, it's like you are really taking over a huge role as a surrogate for reality. And it just doesn't have to be that hard. So bottom line for this part of the message is, I would say, get your metrics agreed upon, get them measured, keep that live feed, not, 2 months after the fact. That's not useful information. Keep that live feed in front of your people. We have the placemat tool that we use.
Tool.
That's a tool in the No Ego book. But so message number one, I think, because we're talking about feedback, is don't do all the work when it comes to feedback. Set up systems and processes that keep your people having a pipeline on reality and
facilitate that.
Yeah, and you just facilitate that. And that's why I'm kind of anti all this over focus on feedback, because I think it's a surrogate, and you're already down this rabbit hole of it's going to be biased. It's going to tap into the ego. Now, you need to give feedback. And so we'll talk next about what we learned from the high accountables and like giving feedback. But I just wanted people to like have a takeaway message on this part so that your ego doesn't find another excuse about why you don't need to give feedback.
Yeah. And it gets me thinking about a lot of how or many of our systems are going towards, we're going to have more data, like Salesforce.com. We're going to be able to keep all of that. It's going to have even more data to work from. And some people resist that. And I think it's oftentimes because once we have more of that information, you might not actually be top salesperson, or as we have all of this extra data, it's so much clearer that you're not maybe as performing as well as you thought, and you might have to step your game up, and that gets people a little scared. Like I see that happening so much.
And a lot of the ways people have gotten their powers based on their history, or sometimes the illusion or the image they've been able to control or market to the powers that be, rather than the actual results produced. So it can't only be about results. You got to have some metrics about quality of life that you create. Like if you leave bodies in the street, I think that's
as
important
you get your
too.
Results.
Exactly. But I think the more we can give people the gift of not needing to rely on their own leader for feedback, the better. But there are times, one source of, who would trust one source of data?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially one that is so corrupted, because we're human. We have our own bias and all of that. So just to know, some of you are watching this because we recorded it in both video and audio. You might have noticed the lighting changed a little bit. Absolutely true. The sun came out. We started this podcast very early this morning, and I had to interrupt to take a few calls, but we are back at it, talking feedback on the No Ego podcast with Alex Dorr, our VP of People Evolution. Alex has got me talking about this topic about feedback, and
finally got you sat down.
You got me sat down. So it's a good topic to talk about, because I think people need to get more skilled in getting it and receiving it. And there is a place for feedback, but I would tell you that high accountables tell us that feedback, the best feedback is pretty short and reality-based. And what really is helpful for them is the self-reflection. That's what really drives accountability. But back at it.
Yeah, and going along with that, one of the big things I've heard you say is that if you can open your mind to the fact that all feedback could be true, this really helps with receiving feedback.
It really does.
I had a quick story where I was really sitting with this whole idea that all feedback could be true. And I was at the house, and I'm carrying a bunch of stuff down the stairs, and obviously not very responsibly, because I'm trying to balance it like I'm holding like a platter of pizza, it seems like, and all these things. And as I'm going down the stairs, I slip back a little bit, and foot goes right into the wall. And so in the moment, there's a hole in the wall. My wife, Anna, yells out, "Alex, you're so clumsy." Okay. So that's the feedback. Just one sentence, you hear it, and immediately I get triggered. And the reason I get triggered, I had to investigate, but it's like, oh, I was an ex-athlete. I'm clumsy. Give me a footwork drill. I'll show you what I can do. And so I was looking for all these ways that it's not true. I'm like, this isn't true. I can do any footwork drill. I got the best feet out here. I'll show you. So initially response is all the ways it's not true. But then after a while, I took a moment to self-reflect. And the question you always throw out there is, well, what are 3 ways it could be true that I was clumsy in that moment?
Nice.
So what comes to mind for you, Sai, when I'm coming down the stairs with all these things, I put a hole in the wall. What are 3 ways that could be true?
Yeah.
So the first one, you nailed it. I was like, I just put a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
That's pretty clumsy. And then I just kept sitting with it. What's another way that could be true?
When it comes to receiving feedback, you tend to be pretty clumsy.
It's like all feedback's a gift that could be true. That was a clumsy way to receive it. I lashed out like, what? And then I thought another one that came to mind is it's pretty clumsy to lash out at someone you love.
Yeah.
Like that's really clumsy.
That's a clumsy way to live.
And it was so true. Like when you look at that was a piece of feedback. And if you self-reflect long enough, there's definitely 3 ways or more that was true. And I've just been sitting with that more and more. And what it's done is if you can get there through self-reflection, then every piece of feedback you get, no matter how wrong you think it is in the moment,
totally,
it's a gift. It truly is. It took me a while to realize that, but now I truly understand that. And so I'm grateful that lesson you've put out there. And I don't know if you've had some other stories with that.
Yeah, there's a ton. I want to just kind of break it down for the listener because you're pretty fluent in this by now. But one of the things that happens when we get feedback is that's pretty much an immediate toggle down into low self because we're just so accustomed to you don't know me and you aren't me and you don't understand and you don't know what I'm living through.
You weren't there.
Yeah, you weren't there. And just the ego really clamps down on any exposure of vulnerability. And of course, Brene talks about courage and vulnerability and how that just creates a totally different workplace and world place. And so vulnerability is really an amazing creative place to be. What keeps us out of vulnerability is that immediate defensiveness. And so we all have to practice unhooking from our ego because if you're not out there, you're a basketball player practicing your free throw thousands of times.
It's like fundamental.
Yeah,
right?
When it's time to actually shoot the free throw for the big game, you're not ready. And so a lot of people don't realize that a lot of this stuff, they go, Sai, it's really hard to do this in the moment. Well, that's because you're not practicing it day after day after day. So one way to practice unhooking from your ego, of course, is meditation. But another one is to practice receiving feedback in a way that you work as hard at finding how it could be true as you do it finding how it isn't true. So I like to give people concrete assignments. Find 3 ways it could be true. And don't just do the cheesy stuff. It's true because I got a hole in the wall that I'm looking at. What I love that you did is you just use that as a metaphor, an analogy for clumsy feedback. Where else am I living clumsy? Because if you take the word that triggered you most and you want to get really comfortable with that word, you've got to be able to look throughout your life and just find so many examples of, it's clumsy to be curt or yell at somebody I love. It's clumsy to be, because the feedback that triggers us is such an invitation to go deeper with self-compassion and get more comfortable with who you really are, messiness and all. And that's why I say, life's messy, but you can live happy. You're messy and you can still live happy, but you can't live happy if you keep denying your messiness.
Yeah.
So I remember going through an exercise where I was first practicing this and people would say, give me feedback, and I would just sit with it and find out how it could be true. And then it got to become a challenge. I'm like, okay, all feedback's true. And so my team was like, you know what, we can find some feedback that you have to deny. There's just no way and so it became kind of a game. And so I'd walk in and they tried easy ones. They're like, Sai, you're a liar. I'm like, well, yeah, I put makeup on before I came into work. I'm lying to you about what I really look like. I've lied to your face. I lied write on my driver's license. Like that was too easy.
Yeah.
So one day I came in and they're like, Cy, we got one for you. I go, what is it? And they go, Cy, you're a murderer.
Ooh.
And I'm like, oh, dang. I mean, that's a hefty felony in this state. Like, I'm like, ooh. And my initial reaction is like, oh, I mean, I don't think so. And then my cheesy reaction is, oh, I'm sure I've murdered people's character by, talking poorly about them. That's too easy.
But the mind's starting to open, right?
The mind's starting to open. And by the way, when your mind opens, your heart opens. You just live a better life. So I sat with that a while and I started to think, on a funny side, I'm thinking, gosh, dang, back in college, I acted really irresponsibly. I drank. One day I drank and blacked out for probably 4 hours. And I'm thinking there could be some unsolved murder. Who knows if I drove or... And then it really hit me in a big way with all of the learning I'm trying to do about my own biases and what the data really says out in the world. And, I had just listened to a podcast about the number of people who are in minorities on death row and the disproportionate number of minorities on death row just doesn't make sense. And it just really reveals so much bias. And I started thinking, you know what? I've got a part in that. I voted for a governor who hinted that he might reinstate capital punishment. Oh. And I just kind of went forward anyway, even though I was a little uncomfortable with that. And lo and behold, within months after he became governor, he reinstated capital punishment. So now with how, and this is just my political affiliation, right? So don't anybody take any offense out there, but how I am a murderer by being careless with my vote and being a bystander as we have so much bias determining the life and death of people in our community. So as I'm kind of waking up a bit to that, I'm like, it's even more true. So I think the more we wake up, the more all feedback is true. Now, this is kind of mind-blowing for some people because they're like, all feedback. I got a
situation for you. Yeah.
But when people come to me and I give them an assignment for self-reflection, a lot of times they'll come back to me. They'll have all the reasons it isn't true. But my assignment was find how it is true. And so I encourage them, let's work as hard at finding how it is true as you did finding how it isn't true, because that's where you give birth to mental flexibility. And actually, so then the ego's not playing you. You're actually contemplating being played by the ego. Have I ever told you how I got started on this path?
That'd be interesting to hear.
When I was early in my career, I was thinking I was such a hot shot, and I had a leader, and she would give me feedback, and I did the political correct thing, which I would sit calmly while she finished her stupid sentence.
Say thank you or whatever they tell you.
Well, no, I didn't even get that far. And I would just be like, well, I can understand from your viewpoint how you might have that limited view, but let me tell you how things really went down out in the field, right? So she cared about me so much. She goes, Cy, in today's development session, we're going to work on your ability to receive feedback. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm pretty good at this. This should be easy, right? And she goes, so before I give you feedback, I'm going to give you these 5 index cards. And on each card is a response. You can only pick one, or you can use more of these responses, but you can only respond as what's on the index card.
Okay.
So she gives me these index cards. I'm like, okay. Give me the feedback. And I don't even know what the feedback was. And she gave me the feedback. And I looked down at the card. And the first one says, thank you on it. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work. And the second one was like, oh, I've noticed that about myself as well.
Threw that one out too.
And then I'm like, thank you. I'll consider that. And I'm just like, I noticed that about myself too. It's something in my past that here's what I've done to work on it. And then the last one was like, yes, will you help me or something? And when I got limited to only those cards as my responses, you should have heard my ego screaming about the injustice and just all the fears about the future. And so I would just really encourage people. We hear the cliche that all feedback's a gift. What if all feedback is just feedback? It's just something to take a look at, play with, find the ways it is true, find the ways it isn't true. But just know that if you're a human being, you have that in you. Mm-hmm. You have all of it in you. Like we all have these universal ways that we move through the world with like little skill set. Be
or
open
awareness.
to it, or awareness.
And I've, as you play that all the way out, as you keep not entertaining how it could be true, what eventually happens if your reactions stay harsh, you see that you just kind of stay asleep to something that could really take you kind of the next level of experience with other coworkers. And if you don't ever look at how it could be true, then you might not even realize how you've been in that meeting for 10 years now, 20 years now, that maybe you could have taken a look at it and it would have, helped you show up in a better way. So
absolutely. Which goes back to our principle. One of those great questions, would you rather be right or successful? Would you rather be right or happy? Because that basic principle, I mean, there's so many times that we just resist saying, gosh, dang, that could be true. Like you're right about that. And I think it's resisting our own vulnerability. And the reason we resist vulnerability, I think, is because when we get vulnerable, we have very little self-compassion. And so we're so harsh to ourselves that it's almost like a part of us knows that if we show ourselves our own vulnerability, that our self-talk, and we'll have so little compassion for ourselves. And so if you want to be more able to get well-versed in receiving feedback and getting vulnerable, you got to work on your own self-compassion and your acceptance of your whole self. Now, a lot of people are like, I want to bring my whole self to work. And I always say, no, just bring your evolved self. But in order to get to your evolved self, you have to play around with your whole self and do a lot of accepting. But instead, what we do is we don't accept our whole self, and then we bring it to work and bleed on everybody else. So the private work, the self-reflective work you've got to do is really getting in touch with your whole self, and with self-compassion, really accepting your whole self so that you can curate the self you want to bring to work, which isn't this ego, like righteous self. So, but we said we were going to talk about feedback. We've talked about receiving it. We've talked about why I think that, it gets corrupted. But those high accountables really told us, like, what was most helpful to them is feedback that was unbiased, focused on reality, but that feedback should be short and like self-reflection longer. And I think feedback should be seen as not the method you use to change the behavior of another, which a lot of people are like, I'm going to give you feedback. And it's an attempt to control your behavior. And I would define feedback as a jump start for self-reflection. It's interrupt the thinking. Point. It's interrupt the thinking, but through self-reflection, have somebody see if they can reveal that truth and try it on for size. And then the role of a leader is settling the mind, in that we all have this human condition. I'm not saying you're not good enough. I'm saying I want you to look here. And so the language we use is so important. It's like, I like the words I've noticed lately. Right? Something I've noticed lately about how you're moving through the world. Someone who cares about you brought it to my attention that you could get more skillful in this area. Here's something that I've picked up on, and I want to present it to you, but don't take my word for it. Try it on for yourself. Size. Try it on for size. Check it out for yourself. Those are the type of language I like feedback to come into, so that people understand, like, I'm not stepping out of relationship. I didn't step high in hierarchy to judge you. I am inviting you to see the world from a different viewpoint. And the best way I can do that as a leader is give you some of those assignments for self-reflection to really move you through. And it might be as simple as, here's what I see that you do that helps, and here's what hinders, or, it's so important to help people understand that I give you feedback and self-reflection to not only help you produce better results, but to ease your own suffering. Like, you're moving through the world. If you're suffering, you're either moving through the world unskillfully, so you need to up your skill set, or with a less than modern approach, or with not full willingness. And so when people aren't delivering, I believe, or when they're suffering, or they're thinking these jobs have become undoable, or they're telling me they could deliver if they had more time or priorities to change, I really want them to move away from why they can't. That's what leaders do, is manage energy, into how they could. And how you could either has to do with upping your skill set, modernizing your approach, or checking back in and choosing buy-in and willingness.
Yeah.
That's not conditional. So I think feedback is just a jump start. One sentence is good. Jumpstart people's self-reflection.
Empowered by self-reflection.
Yep.
Yeah.
So leaders give feedback in the form of a sentence and then back out of it. Don't take my word for it. And then invite the person to self-reflect and give them an assignment. And that's how I think feedback should be working.
Yeah, I love that template for just following that process. One sentence, don't take my word for it, check it out for yourself. And then in the back of the No Ego book, how many are there? There's like 20 of those.
There's like 20 assignments
that you can
for
try
self-reflection.
on. And then I wanted to add on, I dug this up at our last certification because people were asking about feedback. You have what is called a feedback frame, which is a little bit more in-depth because you found
It's
that
for
most
early
leaders, early managers don't have even just the bones of that. What's a good place to start? And as I found this video on you really teaching people how to practice this feedback frame, you had this hilarious story about how to practice it. And I hope you can share this. I got to get this on the airwaves because it's back when Mel Gibson was going through some development of his own. And
Mel Gibson, half of our leaders don't even remember. They weren't even born when Mel was in the day.
But I wasn't ready for it. And as I'm watching the video, you stayed all calm and then you went into it. And I literally cracked up laughing out loud as you went through it. So maybe you could walk people.
First I got to tell people what the feedback frame is. So a lot of folks, when they go in for feedback, they have either been trained like, if it's feedback, make it a sandwich and start with something good and end with something good. But it's usually not very authentic and it sounds really trite. I also see feedback that just comes in like a Mack truck, right? But most importantly, I see people giving feedback who haven't processed or self-reflected on their own stuff.
Yeah.
And so you got to come in, leaders, clean with this. So I teach a 4-part process so that it isn't that you follow it as a routine, but it makes sure you've self-reflected. So the first thing you need to self-reflect on and come up with like a sentence on is the person that you're connecting with in the moment. What are they doing that inspires you? What can you see in them that is great? What are they doing that's working well? And a lot of people go, well, that starts, so they know it's a positive interaction. That's not why I do it. I do it so you remember they're good people who, for the most part, are working their tail off.
Yeah.
And that you're going to just direct them into kind of a next behavior, right?
Small pivot or something.
Small pivot. These are pivots, folks. If you're not giving feedback on pivots, you're not having enough conversation.
Yeah.
Right. If your feedback is about, we have to totally remake
180s. Yeah.
Then you have sat out of this for a while. So the first thing you do, the first part of the frame is, Alex, here's what you're doing that I appreciate, or here's what you're doing that really adds impact. Fill in the sentence. Keep it one topic. The next thing then you bring into this process that you answer so you can give is, here's what's not working yet. Mm-hmm. And yet is such an important word because it implies this is all figure outable. This is all, Marie Forleo says this is all figure outable, right?
I love that.
So, or it could be, here's where I want you to develop next. Like I'm calling you to the next level of greatness. And then the third piece of information is help me understand like what's missing. So without defensiveness, just help me understand your immediate thoughts around that. It could be where I give you an assignment and say, come back to me with having self-reflected on and helping me better understand
your process
or your goals, what you were hoping for and how did it work for you and how's your current approach or skill set maybe lacking. And then the fourth thing we talk about is here's what's possible. Because I want to end on managing energy towards what does great look like? And if we were great, like what's possible for us? Why is this even important? Mm-hmm. So a lot of leaders, as they go through this, we work with them to do a lot of processing so that you're not talking about 100 issues. You're not just starting on the second, like here's what's wrong. You're really doing some well-rounded things, well-rounded communication, and you're keeping it just to one topic. Yeah. These aren't like a list. So how that might sound in work feedback would be, Alex, I really appreciate your attention to detail. You really bring in some finishing touches that help take us to the next level. What I want you to work on next is there are times that you're approaching everything with the same level of detail, even when it doesn't merit that level. So sometimes it only needs to be a straw man document and you're gold plating it. So help me understand how you discern and pre-budget how much attention to detail you'll give something. How do you make those decisions? Because here's what's possible. If you could determine upfront the resources that it would make sense to commission on the project, given who's going to see it and where it's going, I think you could free up time and really put the right time into the right things, right? So I just went through that. So a lot of people get overwhelmed by that. And they're like, oh my gosh, Sai, you can do that, but I can't. So I give you the assignment when you're traveling to work, take whatever movie star is in trouble on the news. And then practice in your car or on the train with this model. So while I was teaching this a lot, Mel Gibson was doing things like denying the Holocaust. And I think he had roughed up some female in his life. I don't know. I don't want to accuse him of anything, but if my memory serves me right. It
needed some feedback, probably, at least.
And so I was teaching people how to practice this. And so how would you do this with Mel Gibson if he's in front of me? And I'd be like, Mel, the thing I love about you is your ability to pick the scripts, man. Braveheart, all-time best ever movie. If you're too young to know that movie, you got to go watch it. Mel, what I love about you is you pick great scripts and you are capable of doing amazing work. What's not working for me yet is your take on the Holocaust and women. And help me understand, when you went on the Jay Leno show and went on this crazy riff about the Holocaust, what were you hoping for? And Mel, here's what's possible. As a therapist, I think with the right medication, we could really help you make a comeback, right? And so you're just
practicing.
But you love that story. But it's
dying.
I started to just really take anybody through the wheel, whoever had gotten in trouble the night before, take them through it and practice. It comes a place that if you speak with a cadence, it's soothing to the ego to know, oh, I've been through this before. I know where this is going. She's going to give me kind of 4 parts. I'm expected to interact and reflect on my part. And so having a framework gets things out from being under the control of the ego and makes it expected. And it just changes the energy. Instead of me giving you feedback, it's you and I working on this feedback frame, filling in the blanks together. And it just puts us back on the side of allies, not enemies. And so much of leadership is managing energy. And so many people are afraid of giving feedback because of how the people will respond and whether or not they take it personal. But the reality is that feedback, when done kind of off the cuff and intermittently with no good data, it's hard not to take that personal.
It's rough. And I think something you said back to the feedback frame is you're focused on one point. And I think the moment you have more coming in, your ego just gets overwhelmed and you're like, so what do you want me to focus on first? Or you just kind of shut down if it's 3 or 4 things that come up in that unorganized meetings. That framework is so important.
And we have a term for it. It's called flooding.
Yeah.
We have a term, in marriage therapy, when people are talking about issues and somebody becomes flooded, we stop the action and give them 20 minutes to kind of regroup and self-soothe, right? So if one person gets flooded a lot, that may be their issue. But if everyone you give feedback to gets flooded, you might want to look at your own process, for giving feedback. And the need for feedback and the directness of feedback changes based on where people are at in their awareness cycle. And we've got to remember that too. If people are kind of unaware and clueless, feedback is more valuable than people who are aware and working, towards growth and development. So feedback can actually demotivate people, and you have to switch techniques between feedback and feed forward. Marshall Goldsmith taught us this. So there's this change cycle that if you're clueless, you're not aware at all.
That's where we mostly start.
You're blind to this, or you haven't yet accepted that it's you and not your circumstances, right? Or or maybe even you haven't quite gotten to that motivation
to act on it.
Feedback's important then, right? But once you're like, I get it, I accept it, I want to work on this, to keep getting feedback just isn't that useful. And so I use a lot more from Marshall Goldsmith, what he taught us about feed forward, which is suggestions for the future instead of I caught you in a recollection of the past, right? And that's where I like that what's possible starts to move into the future and how you could make that work.
Absolutely. And if we could get one more story out of you, you told a story about one of your team members let you know you're a little bit intimidating early on in your career with this model. I think that'll help bring it home. But do you remember that one? I think that'd be great to help walk through that. For a long time. Well, that change cycle, I thought was such a powerful example of your own experience of it, where you weren't necessarily ready to act on it at a point, and then you finally said, maybe this is something to develop in.
So when people go through a change cycle, and this isn't my change cycle, it's just kind of a common one we use in the field. There's these 6 steps. So somebody moves not all at once. People think if I give you feedback, you're going to go from clueless to, drastic improvement, fluent.
Or taking action on it.
And knowing the change cycle, people can see that many times these are multiple small conversations over time. So the change cycle is people start out clueless, and then they go from cluelessness to awareness, but often not times acceptance. So I'm aware you think that, but you really are misunderstanding me. And then some people move into acceptance, but they just accept that's how I am. I'm just not good at change. That's my personality.
I'm just extroverted.
Yeah,
so
I'm not I keep interrupting, right? Because I'm extroverted. They're not motivated to change it. Then people move into motivation, and that's the time they should build a plan. Most people build a plan way prematurely. So they're motivated to build a plan, right? And then what people don't understand is they're going to go through this point where they build the plan and they do well in relapse and do well in relapse. And then eventually they're going to see that there's some good consequences coming their way for having changed their behavior. So if somebody quit smoking, right? They follow this path. So it was the same boss who gave me the index cards. She had her work cut out for about 5 years.
This sounds like,
she just hit me in the head with 2x4s. So I was on track to be looked at for promotion, like a high potential program. And part of the program is we got 360s. So they send out my 360 and I meet with my 360 coach. And he's telling me that one theme was consistent throughout the entire report. And that was that people tend to find me intimidating. And I am so clueless. I'm looking to see if he's got the right binder. I'm like, no, are you sure you're reading the Cy Wakeman's results? And he's like, pretty sure. So I was just becoming aware that people found me intimidating. And he's like, you know what? Let's stop here. Don't take my word for it. Check it out for yourself. As you move through the world, see if you can find a couple of examples of how that might be true. And I come back and I was horrified. I got on the elevator. All conversations stopped. People just look straight forward. I'm like, maybe I'm intimidating. I walked on a unit at the hospital. They're singing happy birthday. The tempo of the song increased. They're like, and happy birthday to you. Okay, gotta go. Let's go back to work. I started to find how people scattered around me. So then I become aware that potentially I'm intimidating, right? But I'm not in the mood to fix it, right? Because I'm not accepting this. I get that other people think I'm intimidating, but they've really got me all wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think it's Robert in finance who is scared of me, and now he's spreading all these rumors about me. He needs to, if he can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm all focused on
Robert's
Robert.
issue.
So I get that. Maybe I'm intimidating, but that's other people's issues. So then over time, I'm starting to accept that's how I am, but I'm actually kind of starting to use it for evil.
It's a superpower, right?
A superpower. When people are in a meeting and I don't like what they're saying, I get intimidating and it just changes it. So my boss kept checking in with me. How are you doing on improving that? I'm like, I just don't know. I mean, I get results. And so it's just kind of how I am. One day we got the promotion list and Robert got a promotion that I did. I was so mad. And I went to her and I said, why didn't I get that promotion? I was more qualified. She's like, well, we gave you feedback 6 months ago. You haven't been motivated to change. I got super motivated, right? So now I've gone from clueless to aware to accepting to motivated, but I wasn't that good at it, right? And and we built a plan for how I could be better. Now, if I had built a plan way back in the beginning, it would be like how to image manage around other people, like how to get them to show my nicer side. But this plan was real because I had insight. And so it wasn't I was intimidating all the time. It was also that I also was assigned intimidating work. Like I'm the person who fired people.
Interesting.
And so when I walked on a unit, like people didn't know if I was there to fire somebody or to hand out pay raises, right? So we built a plan, and my boss was so kind. She knew that even with my best intentions, after that plan was built to improve on myself, that I would get in high stress moments and relapse.
Yeah.
And so she even came up with a signal, like in a meeting, if I was starting to get really intimidating
like
or passionate,
or
she had a little like thing she would just pull on her earlobe, and that was just my signal to check myself. And then eventually I got this promotion, this good consequence. And I went to her, I'm like, I'm so glad you guys figured out I wasn't that intimidating. And she goes, no, you were intimidating and you have grown and fixed it, and that's why you got the promotion. So when you think of her as a leader, she used feedback to get me out of cluelessness to awareness and to get me accepting. And feedback, you didn't get the job because once I got motivated, she no longer gave me feedback and beat me up with it. She gave me feed forward. And she was like, here's some suggestions. Here's some folks that do well in tough meetings. Go talk to them about their 3 best tips. And so I like for people to understand situational leadership is about being flexible with that as well.
Perfect.
Yeah. You know, one thing, and I know I'm closing out, I hear people have a very common excuse for feedback.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever done this, Alex? You're on tour and they're like, yeah, but here we're Minnesota nice. And they get to California. You get to California and they're like, we're California nice.
It happened in the middle of a session. Someone, I think it was in Michigan. They're like, yeah, but have you heard of Michigan nice? And it dawned on me, I was in California, that happened. And then I lived in England for a couple of years. And they're like, well, it's just a type of English nice, which basically was meaning like, we're really nice to your face. You know, don't give you much feedback there. And then if you get in the car after, you're like, what happened? It's just like so negative. And so,
and what's so funny is that everybody, the ego's got you convinced you're so special that they even title it by their state or their country. Yeah. It's like an agreed upon excuse, right? But in therapy, it doesn't change by region. We would just call it passive aggressiveness, right? And so it's so funny because you can be kind and clear. You can be kind and honest. And so many people have or in there, like, do you want me to be kind or honest? And that's the ego. Yeah. Wherever or is in play, that's the ego. And so whenever you're letting yourself off the hook with an excuse, listen for the or and go back in and go, what's the and here?
Gotcha.
Because if I'm not giving you good access to information to make different decisions by, whether it's your reality or my feedback to jumpstart, then not only is it unkind, but I'm adding to the chaos, not the clarity. And one of the things we've got to do for each other, it's not just leaders giving feedback to people that work on their teams, it's everyone being willing to have conversations that create clarity, not chaos.
Absolutely. So, and we're constantly surprised that all these ways we help facilitate that relationship with reality and add to the clarity. Human beings make great decisions.
They do.
Once that information's clear. Like they're not as bad and non-obedient, I guess, as you think. It's like once it's clear, we really do make a lot better decisions, but it's that whole
people who have good data make better decisions. We got to quit screwing up the data that they get. People who know better do better. Maybe not immediately, but over time, always. And people who self-reflect and come to their own realization, wake up in a way that is meaningful in the world. People that we keep like throwing cold water on them to wake them up. It's just not a way that anybody wants to wake up. So here's my assignment. We always end podcasts with assignment. I want you guys to really think about what you think feedback is and change that definition. It's the wake up call to begin self-reflection, right? It's an imitation. And I also want you to think about how you're receiving feedback and to use it as more of a meditative process than a defensive process. And those would be really my 2 pieces. Really take a look at how you're giving feedback. It should be conversational, not confrontational. And how you're receiving feedback. It should be welcome. And again, not with confrontation. So dang it, Alex, you got me talking about feedback.
Can't wait for the response on this
another goal. listeners, tell us what other subjects you want Alex to get me talking about, because we've got some great podcasts coming your way.
Thank you, guys.